support.
The maestro, please.
End of the month yet again, and I hope you're not tired of Kendrick Lamar, because today we are going to be talking about him yet again, along with SZA, for their song Luther.
Kendrick Lamar.
Obviously, as said in the intro, we talk about Kendrick Lamar an awful lot, the latest two being...
Bitch, you ugly as fuck. You out of pocket. 2 ATMs.
And of course, the absolute favorite.
They not like us. They not like us. They not like us. They not like us.
Obviously, he's since released his album, all of which have pretty much charted, as well as the Super Bowl halftime show, but beyond those two things, he's been too busy to release any other individual pop songs.
SZA.
Marking the third time we've talked about SZA, first on her solo song.
I might kill my ex, I still let him go. Rather
And again as a feature on, oddly enough, Drake's track.
slime me yo out, and slime me yo out, and slime me yo out.
Since then, she's also gotten some more single pop hits.
Time's better on Saturn, got to break this pattern. Flow
And even another one with Kendrick Lamar.
I'm 30 for 30. I'm 30 for 30. I'm 30 for 30. I'm 30 for 30.
chat. Should they fold that bitch?
Background.
Luther was originally released as a single on November 29th of 2024, charting the following week at number 3. Obviously, because of all Kendrick Lamar's hype, what with the Grammys and the Super Bowl halftime show, it stayed near the top and it finally hit number 1 as of the beginning of March. It contains a number of samples from the Luther Vandross and Sherilyn's cover of the Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell song,
If this world were mine, I would make you.
Oddly enough, it samples the name drop of the song at the first point from the beginning of Luther Vandross's first verse.
If this world were mine,
Hey.
if this world were mine,
It then also samples Luther Vandross's refrain.
this world were, if this world were.
Even later in the song, and as well as at the very end, it samples Sherilyn.
If this world were
It go
mine,
in.
if this world were mine.
Besides those, we get one more Luther Vandross sample in the outro. Oddly enough, no one from the Luther Vandross, Sherilyn, or even the Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell version are actually credited on this, but the song is named after Luther Vandross, obviously Luther. Luther is off of Kendrick Lamar's latest album, GNX, which was released on November 22nd, 2024. It's actually the third single off of the album, the other ones being...
Squabble up. Squabble up. Squabble up. Squabble up. Squabble up.
and of course the legendary...
Turn his TV off. Turn his TV off. Huh. Turn his TV off. Turn his TV off. Huh. Turn his TV off.
Besides Kendrick Lamar and SZA, production and writing credits go to Ink, Sam Dew, Jack Antonoff, Soundwave, Scott Bridgeway, M-Tech, Rose Lila, and Kamasi Washington. Atia Boggs, better known as Ink, has a number of high-profile credits to her name, like
Alien superstar. Whip, whip.
I'm too classy for this world.
and
Ready to go far and start walking.
moving on down to Sam Dew. We talked about him first back when we did
I don't wanna live forever, 'cause I know
as well as N95, but he's also gotten a few more since then, like
I feel the lavender haze creeping up on me. So real.
and
Now this is the experience of being an American whore.
just like Kendrick Lamar, we've talked about Jack Antonoff a bunch, the latest two just being
And for a fortnight there we were, forever running to you.
and
Please, 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 don't prove I'm right.
since then he's also continued to work with Sabrina Carpenter.
Oh, it's slim pickings. If I can't have the one,
Along with some other pop artists as well.
do you miss us?
Soundwave is another repeat appearance on the show. We did talk about him both on N95 and Not Like Us, but considering Not Like Us wasn't too long ago, he hasn't gotten any other pop credits since. Next we have Rushan Ackers, also known as Scott Bridgeway. Not quite the powerhouse as the others, but he does have one other pop credit to his name, being
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Similarly, Matt Bernard, aka M-Tech, also has a few to his name, the big one being and also in that same name, Rashrita Baja, better known as Rose Lila, has one additional pop credit to her name as well.
You can ask all the ops, niggas know 4L gang go psycho. Cap ass, rap ass, battery in a back ass.
Finally, we have Kamasi Washington, legendary sax player, mostly seen in the funk and jazz realm, but obviously pops up in R&B and hip-hop a lot, given this is his first major pop credit. Luther is released by Kendrick Lamar's PG Lang, as well as Interscope.
Form.
Luther is an R&B song, just under 3 minutes long, is in D major 4/4 time, and is 138 or 69 beats per minute, depending on if you want to do the quarter note feel or the half note feel. The song opens with a short guitar intro, and then later on we have the first Luther Vandross sample. We then get Kendrick Lamar with the first verse.
Hey, Roman numeral 7, babe, drop it like it's hot.
And SZA with the first chorus, given there's some Kendrick Lamar in there as well.
This world, concrete flowers grow.
We then get a lovely back and forth between Kendrick Lamar and SZA,
We go in, out, door, slow.
before jumping into the second chorus, which is more equally done by both now.
If it was up to me, I wouldn't give it no.
We then have a third verse from both of them. You could argue it's a bridge, though.
Settle down for you, I'ma show you I'm a pro. I'ma take my time and
Before getting the outro, which obviously ends the song.
If this world were mine.
Guitar.
So there's a bunch of guitars that play throughout the song, an acoustic one, an electric one, a bass one, but the opening is done in these 3 layers of the acoustic guitar. After that, though, they kind of just sporadically come in and out, like in this particular instance, really just a light addition from the acoustic guitar. Given later on, you see what I was talking about. Up top, we have the acoustic guitar, we have that electric guitar in the middle, and even a bass guitar in the bottom. Later on, as we get to the last verse, though, things become a bit more formulaic. Here we have these 2 kind of layers above these arpeggiated chords from the guitars. This continues until the end of that section, and even has that little run that the string kind of do, given it's obviously a different run, because a guitar can't really do the same runs that a string player can.
Bass.
Really the only instrument that plays consistently throughout the entire song, starting off on that low D, jumping up to G before hitting that F sharp and going down to E. Following that, it starts off on the F sharp, dropping down to that D, and then going back to the G with that lovely little 8th note figure at the end. As we get into the middle of the first verse, though, it really just reiterates that low D. It then essentially repeats all that, because Kendrick Lamar essentially repeats everything he's doing in the verse, but notice now that that last D is held out a bit longer. Getting to the chorus, it mostly focuses going on those E's, and then goes even higher to those A's. Following that, it hits some E's and then a really low E, and then an A and then a really low A, before ending on a G sharp of all things. As we get into the second part of the chorus, it mostly just sticks on that G chord, minus the 8th note figure at the end. given following that, it jumps back down to that D before going back up to the A. Past that, it does have a couple of variations, but we don't get the first major change until the third verse. Starting off on that G with that 8th note figure going to the F sharp, and then we have this triplet figure, kind of a notated slide downward. That slide downward does go down to an E, which it does in octaves for a quick second on that 8th note, before going back to that low D. As we move on through the third verse, it does these repeated hits on that low G before going back down to that low F sharp, but notice it has one instance of the 16th 8th note figure. As we get towards the end of the song, we get one more sort of unique figure, this repeated E finally going to that low D again.
Keyboard.
The keyboards come actually in a variety of forms, just like the guitars. We have an electric piano, we have a synth, we have a normal piano. Regardless, the first one we hear is towards the very beginning of the song. We have this D major 7 over an A chord before doing this G major 7 chord in sort of these descending fifths from the top of said chord. The following phrase goes to that F sharp minor 7 chord, hitting a high A and transitioning to a fuller G major 7 chord that it ends on with that F sharp note at the end. Then we have an actual piano doing this sort of repeated G major 9 chord, given it revoices some of it at the very end as a nice transitionary figure. It then repeats that idea, but instead of doing that revoiced G major 9 at the end, it's a full bar of this D augmented over F sharp with an added sharp 4, being a G sharp in this case. Getting to the second verse, we now have more of an electric piano, first doing this F sharp minor 7 over E, and then just a straight up E minor 7 chord, and that descending figure now is kind of spelled out fully in these chords, that F sharp minor 7 over A, then a root position F sharp minor 7, before going back to that E minor 7. That is then followed by another F sharp minor 7 chord and a G major 7 chord, given we have that E minor 7 at the end along with that high C sharp. Getting to the third verse, again we have the electric piano playing this D major 7 chord, but then jumping much higher to an F sharp minor over A, which then later becomes just an F sharp minor 7 chord. It then jumps back down with a normal F sharp minor, and then transitioning to that same chord now over A. Following that, we have a high E minor 7 over D, and then a G major even higher before going back down a little bit to that D major 7, then jumping much further down to that D major over F sharp. But we have this nice triplet figure through this G major and A major chord.
Strings.
Is an actual string section. They got a bunch of different musicians to actually come in and do this. Do note that this is sort of a reduction though, because I'm not going to sit here and try to notate, 8 different string players. Regardless, the first time we hear it is actually awfully early in the song, starting on that low A, and it does that descending thirds figure that we first talked about when doing the keyboards. Following that, they now start playing more full chords. We have that A major chord dropping to that F sharp and A in the second bar before going all the way up to that B minor chord for 2 bars. Similarly to the guitars and the keyboards, there is a bit of noodling throughout from the string players to keep things fresh, but we don't get a significant change until the back half of the first chorus. Now we have that F sharp and A going to that G and B in the first bar, before doing this B minor chord again, reducing that to just thirds though in the following phrase on that B and D, and then that G and B. Following that, they sort of do this cascading effect, slowly building to this F sharp minor 7 chord before doing a lovely string run down that you hear all the time in movies. In terms of significant changes from any of that, we have to wait till the second chorus, where they do this lovely additional figure rocking back and forth between just different inversions of F sharp minor. We get one more interesting thing to note from the strings in the third verse, starting off on that F sharp and A, dropping to D and F sharp, then dropping to B and D, really just outlining a B minor 7 chord, and then it rocks back and forth between this C sharp and E and this D and F sharp.
Intro.
In terms of vocals for the intro, it really is just the Luther Vandross sample, but you can really appreciate how wide this actual range for this one figure is on that low D going up to that high C sharp.
If this world were mine.
Hey,
Verse.
The first verse done entirely by Kendrick is actually pretty simplistic. It's really just repeating that D line and then dropping down to the A every now and again.
hey, Roman numeral 7, babe, drop it like it's hot. If this world was mine, I'd take your dreams and make them multiply.
The following phrase is essentially the same, given there's more of those runs down to that A.
If this world was mine, I'd take your enemies in front of God. Introduce them to that light, hit them strictly with that fire.
Getting to the middle of the first verse, we then have this sort of break that he hits on these Ds, and we have that one melisma going on that F sharp E D.
Fa, 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 fa.
Kendrick basically then repeats all of that, but notice now he's doing harmonies with himself, mostly in fifths, given the rundowns to the A for the upper voice, it goes up to that B, then that G, then that F sharp.
Hey, Roman numeral 7, babe, drop it like it's hot. If this world was mine, I'd take your dreams and make them multiply.
And just like he did before, essentially repeats that, given now we have the additional vocal doing that as well.
If this world was mine, I'd take your enemies in front of God. Introduce them to that light, hit them strictly with that fire.
This is where things begin to change though, more focusing on a 16th and dotted 8th as opposed to just 2 8th notes, and notice the D and F sharp harmony repeated to emphasize certain lines.
It's a vibe, do your dance, let them watch. She a fan, he a flop, they just wanna kumbaya, nah.
The second verse drastically changes things. We now also have SZA in the mix, and we open up with this back and forth between SZA and Kendrick Lamar, sometimes doing them together and sometimes going back and forth, given they're two separate lines from Kendrick.
When you ride it, slide.
Baby, you a star, strike pose.
This now continues, but now Kendrick is consistently singing everything with SZA, as well as being the responding voice in the back and forth.
When I'm with you, everything goes. Come and put that on my soul.
This continued pattern makes this verse very interesting, considering that the harmonies and rhythms are quite simplistic, so it's this textural element that's added that makes it interesting.
Bobby, count, wrist, froze, check, down, on the way home.
In the third verse, we have Kendrick Lamar and SZA basically doing the exact same thing.
I can't lie, I trust you, I love you, I won't waste your time, I turn it off, just so I can turn you on.
You'll notice here that just like in the first two verses, there's nothing too complex in terms of melody or rhythms, and even the melismas are fairly simplistic themselves.
I'ma make you say it loud, I'm not even tripping, I won't stress you out.
As we get to the second half of the third verse, though, we have an additional line not from Kendrick this time, but SZA, adding an extra textural and harmonic component to everything.
I might even settle down for you, I'ma show you I'm a pro, I'ma take my time and turn it off, just so I can turn you on, baby.
As we end the third verse, this actually takes various lines from the chorus, the Weekends Get It Poppin' and the Better Days Comin' lines, and we have one more additional melody over the top of this from SZA, much higher in her range now.
Weekends get it poppin' on the low, better days coming for sure.
Chorus.
The chorus starts off with just SZA, oddly enough lower in her range than Kendrick in his. You'll notice here it's a bit more spaced out, we still have some 16th melismas and some 8th notes, but we do have this focus on quarter and half notes at the very beginning.
This world, concrete, flowers grow. Heartache, she only do what she know.
This continues into the following phrase, still very low in her register, still very simplistic rhythms, but we do have an additional sample from the Luther Vandross and Cheryl Lynn song.
Weekends get it poppin' on the low. Better days coming for sure.
This world.
In the second half of the chorus, things get a bit more interesting with the addition of Kendrick Lamar singing everything SZA is, and you'll notice here that the melody is a bit more complex here as well.
If it was up to me, I wouldn't give it nobody's no sympathy. I take away the pain.
This continues on to the end of the first chorus, for the most part Kendrick keeping up with SZA minus the melisma at the end of everything, and we have this really quick rattling off on the I just want to see you win line before getting another Luther Vandross sample.
I give you everything. I just wanna see you win, wanna see you.
If this world were mine.
On the other chorus, we do have Kendrick Lamar now in from the beginning, singing a lovely accompanying line. Notice that he's not doing the melismas that SZA is, and he actually drops out at the end of this phrase to just have SZA do harmonies with herself in thirds.
This world, concrete flowers grow. Heartache, she only doing what she know.
Towards the end of that, we get the same thing, Kendrick Lamar singing along with a slightly different line, and we have this long melisma up top from SZA herself at the end, as well as again the Luther Vandross sample.
Weekends, get it poppin' on the low. Better days coming for sure.
Outro.
Vocally, the outro starts off with these sort of layered vocals done by both Kendrick and SZA, starting off on this inverted C-sharp minor chord before going to a differently inverted F-sharp minor chord. The big thing here is you notice the middle line is always that C-sharp. That's why you're hearing that poke through on one of Kendrick's lines. In the following phrase, we get the last actual Luther Vandross sample, him saying anything, before transitioning to Sherilyn at the end, but you'll notice the backup vocals are a bit more complex now, going sort of up and down through these inverted chords, before finally ending on just a G major chord.
If this world were mine.
More of an old school R&B song, which very lends itself to the sort of thick textures, the strings, and considering the fact that it's sampling an old school R&B song, the Luther Vandross and Sherilyn track, it does make a lot of sense. Comparing this to the other songs that Kendrick Lamar has been coming out with, this isn't like the biggest bop. You're not blasting it like you would TV Off, and certainly not Like Us. Regardless though, it's a very chill song, it's a welcome change from the rest of the tracks on the album, and hey, you may not be able to blast this and hype yourself up on your way out, but you're able to put it on, chill, and relax a little bit.
On the way home, this world, concrete flowers grow. Heartache, she only doing what she know. Weekends, get it poppin' on the low. Better days coming for sure.
And even despite releasing that new R&B album with Party Next Door, Drake still couldn't break into the top 5. 4 out of 5 of which are by Kendrick Lamar, and one of them is the diss track.
If it was up to me,